All right. It's a pleasure for me today to give you the state of the ADRC. This is exciting for me. I haven't done this before, but I think this will be hopefully educational for everybody who's linked with in some way or other the ADRC to understand more about both what it does, but also the relationship with many other affiliated grants, investigators, as well as some of the new things that have happened over the last year or so. So I'm listing my disclosures here for whatever relevance they may have for this talk. Okay, so as many of you know, the Knight ADRC has many affiliated staff and advisors. It's absolutely incredible. This probably doesn't even list everybody who's linked directly or indirectly with the ADRC, but it's an incredible array of people from all backgrounds, diversity, et cetera. And so it's just wonderful that we have the chance all to work together on many of the things that are related to AD and ADRD. Okay, just for background, as of the Knight ADRC, I officially became the principal investigator of the NIH ADRC grant as of July 1st last year, so it's been 1 year. I had been the associate director of the Knight ADRC for more than 15 years before that. Dr. Morris, who obviously had been the director for many years, is now an associate director of the Knight ADRC and joining Dr. Bateman, Krushaga, and Mulder. And Dr. Morris is also the core leader of the Knight ADRC's clinical core and director of the Memory and Aging Project. He also remains PI of the two major affiliated program projects linked with ADRC, which is the Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia P01, as well as the Adult Children Study P01. And I'll briefly talk more about that in a moment. I wanted to point out, I'm sure Dr. Morris is very disappointed that one of his 4 grandchildren is now not yet the director of the ADRC. But more importantly, I really wanted to have us all stop for a second and thank Dr. Morris for his incredible amount of years of leading the ADRC and everything he's done for the ADRC over a long period of time. So I'm going to clap and hopefully he does it. I hope I know we'll all continue to work with him for years to come. And that really gets to the next slide, which is a slide many of you have probably seen elements of before. But I think it's always worth pointing out every year the interrelationships between the different grants that we have and how they work. So the oldest clinical research grant that is on AD that's at Washington University is the Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia Grant, which was first funded in 1984. Leonard Berg was the initial PI. That grant has continued since then and has many different projects over the years. Dr. Morris is the PI of that grant. And also CORES, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. The Adult Children Study emanated from the Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia Grant, and it began in 2005. And it was kind of an offshoot of that initial grant, focusing more on people that are middle-aged who either have a family member with AD or not, to further study the early preclinical AD phase of disease. The Knight ADRC grant itself started in 1985, so 1 year after the Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia grant. And all 3 of these grants have cores, some of which are overlapping with each other in terms of their function. So you can see in the color coding that, for example, the ADRC grant consists predominantly of cores, and all of the ones in blue are ones where the Knight ADRC is involved in the cores. The red is for the HASD, which cores overlap, and then the yellow is the Adult Children Study. So the cores really help these different grants function. And then the other grant that's affiliated with the Knight ADRC started in, gosh, it's already 2008, which was the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer Network grant. Initially, Dr. Morris was the PI, then it became Dr. Bateman. And that grant also has some overlapping cores with these other grants. So it's a complicated interrelationship, but really the core structure really helps benefit all of these grants, probably in a way that wouldn't be possible if if each individual grant had to have its own cores. The Knight ADRC grant itself predominantly now, it changed over the years. Now it predominantly consists of cores, which I'll talk about more in a moment in blue. But there are developmental projects, and some of those are listed here that are currently being funded. And these are listed here, so you can read them in detail if you want. But I think these developmental grants last for 2 years, and then they can new ones are submitted and evaluated, and then move forward. Many of you know that the Knight ADRC grant renewal just took place last month, and the work of many people went into this resubmission. It was submitted in early June, so about a month ago. The cores I'll just point out what's different about this renewal versus the ones that have been in the past. Other than, as I said, I'm now the PI of the grant, but the biggest changes are that there is a new health disparities and equity core, which had existed, but now was submitted with Joy Balsbury as the head of that core as part of the ADRC. So that's something new. And then within the core for outreach, recruitment, engagement, and Andrea Denny was involved, but now a co-PI in this core is Jessica Mazurski. So those are the changes to the renewal that are to these cores. One of the things about all of these grants and their interrelationships in regard to the cores is the incredible stability of the leadership. You can see that everybody who's listed here has been involved in these cores for quite some time. This is not new, which is for a clinical research related effort is so important that you have really good people, but also stable leadership. So for those of you not intimately involved, this area, especially within our own institution, can be confusing as to what the names all mean. So what the Memory and Aging Project was formally established first before any of these grants. And what that refers to is the clinical and cognitive assessment protocols, faculty and staff who administer them. That is the same group that does this for all of these grants. And this started in 1979, so it's the longest standing part of all of this great infrastructure that's here. And again, Dr. Morris remains the head of the Memory and Aging Project. So a lot of different grants support the assessments that are done on research participants. The ADRC grant itself, which again was awarded initially in 1985. And then within this, separate than the NIH funds for this grant, the Charles and Joanne Knight Endowment Gift helps support the infrastructure of this and affiliated grants as well. And then there's the two other major grants I mentioned, Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia, or HASD, and the Adult Children's Study. Those grants also support the infrastructure for the Memory and Aging Project. And all three of these major grants have been continuously renewed every 5 years since they started. So that's just an amazing accomplishment, and hopefully we'll continue to be able to do this. So the other thing is that no matter what grants support an individual's participation in the Memory and Aging Project, all the assessments take place at the same place with the same methods. So we have really good consistency in how things are done. It may seem obvious to many of you here, but the Knight ADRC is incredibly interdisciplinary. There's faculty from 16 departments involved, a lot of faculty and staff from the Danforth campus in both psychology and brain sciences, and also the Brown School of Social Work and Institute of Public Health. At the Olin Business School, Mahendra Gupta has been involved in improving recruitment into Alzheimer's disease clinical trials using a web-based tool that incorporates plasma biomarkers. And then from the Department of Political Science, Matt Gobble's been involved for some time in doing things like conducting national surveys to understand motivation to participate in AD research. So what are the central themes of the NIGHT ADRC and its program projects? I think this is something that while others around the world have started to study over the last years, this is really something that began many years ago when it was realized by investigators here, including Dr. Berg, Dr. Morris, many others, that the Alzheimer's pathology begins many years before the symptoms begin. And so that remains one of the central themes of these grants, which is when in the lifespan does Alzheimer's disease-related pathology, including the accumulation of not only amyloid beta and tau, but also the inflammatory response, when do these things begin and how do they change over time and how are they related to the progression of the disease? So there's, as part of that, we now think there are other factors that might increase risk for this preclinical phase of disease. Some of those, certainly not inclusive, might be the systemic and intestinal inflammatory changes, i.e. like the gut microbiome, physical activity, cerebrovascular disease, social determinants of health and reported race, sleep, and I'm sure there's other things, many other things too. And then what are the factors that influence the transition from somebody who's clinically unimpaired to being impaired? Those are really some of this have remained the central themes of this clinical research for many, many years now. So one of the things that Dr. Morris and now Krista and many others have been working on recently is the idea of whether to combine the Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia Program Project Grant and the Adult Children Study Program Project Grant. And so back in as long ago as 2021, the program officer at the NIH for these grants, Dr. John Shaw, encouraged the combination, the potentially combining these two program projects into one, given their scientific overlap. And this idea was endorsed by the External Advisory Committee for these grants. Then in the fall of 2023, Dr. Shaw advised us that the NIA pay lines had tightened. You probably all remember this from not that long ago, such that we may want to return to the idea of keeping two separate program projects. But more recently, pending a final decision, we're more likely to submit in about a little less than a year from now a mega PO1, meaning a true combination of some of the things that are going on in both these grants. And I know that Krista, Dr. Morris had a conversation yesterday, and I think this is still going to be the plan as of now. So you'll hear more from leadership in the next week or so for those of you who are likely to be involved in this. Okay, so all of these grants make it very likely that, and has been the case, that we're frequently submitting grants. And just to give you an idea, for the ADRC grant, if you look at this timeline, it says future, but we just submitted the revision, the competing revision for this grant last month. Hopefully it will restart with its new cycle in May of 2025, and that goes for 5 years. The other two affiliated program projects, currently the HASD grant, the end date this includes a no-cost extension, would be April 2026. So the goal is to submit this, the competing revision, in May of 2025 to have this hopefully start a year later. And then the adult children's study would be on a similar timeline where we'd hope to combine this submission in about a little less than a year from now. I'm sure all of you who have NIH grants, and especially if they're linked to AD/ADRD, have followed the pay lines. Probably the thing to focus on as of right now, at least through until October, for grants that receive scores, it's still a reasonably good pay line. So for example, if your R01 grant is ADRD and it's less than $5 million, the pay line is about 17th percentile right now. So it's still, historically, that's still quite good. It's less than it had been the last few years, but it's still quite good. New investigators, 20%, and early stage investigators, 22%. So keep submitting grants. It's still a good, good pay line. And then you can see these numbers have tightened quite a bit for some of the larger grants. So for the PO1s, in ADRD, it's 25th percentile. Career Development Awards, 30th percentile. And then this is all for ADRD related topics. So one of the ways that we're able to do research on these large scales is to have philanthropic support for some of the things that we're doing, simply because the NIH budgets do not, for these grants, don't cover everything that needs to be done to make these successful. So the way this is currently supported in relation to the Knight ADRC and the affiliated program projects is that there's two endowments to the Knight ADRC that supports general operations and special initiatives. And then there's another a donation that was given over the last few years to the Department of Neurology to support faculty retention and endowed professorships. So what do these funds do? They really allow a lot of things to happen that otherwise, as I said, the NIH funds just aren't able to cover. And some of those are to augment the clinical core for many of the activities that go on in the clinical core. You can see many of the things that are done there that need additional support that isn't covered by the grants completely. And then if we want to do things like new research projects, including having more developmental projects than the grants support. So that's really supporting new people coming into the field, and also the REC scholarship program. The Knight ADRC Clinical Trials Unit that Dr. Snyder heads has been in part supported by the companies that support the trials, but also from philanthropy. Also, the establishment of the Health Disparities and Equity Core. There's a new research cohort that I'll mention in a moment that Dr. Morris and Nicole have been very involved in, called the COMPASS cohort. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then implementing a system called FreezerWorks, which enables tracking of samples, whether they be fluid biomarker, genetic, neuropathology, across different cores, which has been very helpful. So we're using about $900,000 per year now to support all of the ADRC renewal initiatives that are not covered by NIH funds. So this is obviously a really big enterprise, and how many people have been involved in assisting Dr. Morris, myself, and others in trying to make sure that we have enough money to support the infrastructure that really makes these things happen. Okay, so what about some of the new science that's been supported by the Knight ADRC resources? So in the last year, this is just a listing of the grants that have been funded that are supported by Knight ADRC resources. So there's a KO1 by Ganesh Chand from radiology that's characterizing Alzheimer's disease, molecular and anatomical imaging markers, and their relationships with cognition and genetics using machine learning. A K25, the PI is Abdallah Edelib from psychiatry, and he's looking at identification and characterization of molecular subtypes of AD associated with cognitive function through cross-omics data integration methods. Lei Lu from biostatistics and Guochao Wang from neurology and biostatistics have an R21 on innovative precision medicine methods to subgroup identification for Alzheimer's disease. Brendan Lucy received an R01 on the effect of suvorexant, an orexin receptor antagonist, on AD-related biomarkers. Karen Meeker from neurology received a KO1 on enhancing participation of historically minoritized groups in AD and related dementias. And also an RF1 or an R01 from Dmitry Yablonsky from radiology on deep learning augmented quantitative gradient recalled echo. So a very long term. MRI for in vivo clinical evaluation of brain microstructural neurodegeneration in AD. So we should congratulate everybody for getting these new grants. Okay, so the ADRC and its affiliated grants are incredibly collaborative with many other investigators around the United States and world. Just a few examples of this are that Colin Masters in Australia has an R01 grant on Alzheimer's dementia onset and progression in international cohorts. We're very involved in that grant. Berislav Zlokovic and Arthur Toga have a P01 grant called Vascular Contributions to Alzheimer's Disease that we've been involved with since it started, I think about 7 or 8 years ago. Kenji Xiong has a great R1 that's coming to an end, hopefully will be renewed in some form, that has to do with cross-sectional and longitudinal racial disparity in molecular biomarkers for AD, which is not only from here, but also from Emory, Penn, Wisconsin, and the University of Alabama, Birmingham. And I'll show one slide about this later. DeCrisio and Abner have an R01 grant from Kentucky that is working with Kenji and others here on statistical modeling of aging and risk of transition. And then Sterling Johnson and Beth Mormino have a U01, which is the ADRC Consortium for Clarity in ADRD Research through Imaging. And all of the ADRCs, I think, are required to participate in this new grant, is my understanding. Okay, so what do all these ADRC resources that we're collecting data from, whether it's data, biospecimens, and participants, other than us here using this data for our research, you can see that all the cores that allocate all of this information have been very busy. Just in 2023, in 1 year, there were 236 studies that received data from these cores. It's just an incredible amount of effort, work, but it's really been paying off from all of the great findings that have been coming up. Okay, so I talked earlier about the Memory and Aging Project, which is the way that we evaluate and see research participants. This is just an org chart of this large operation, and you can see it consists of nurse coordinators, social workers, project managers, advanced clinical practice nurses, faculty practice clinicians, and all the people that do the cognitive assessments. And I'll just point out, without going through all the names, people that are new this last year. So Anna Middleton is a research nurse coordinator that joined their nurse coordinator group. Jessica Wold, a clinical research coordinator, just joined. Courtney Kovacevic, I hope I didn't say that. I hope I said that correct, is a nurse practitioner that's joined. Jonathan Williams is a assistant professor in the epilepsy section who started seeing participants in the Memory and Aging Project. Michelle Rudman is one of the fellows at the ADRC, who's also doing research in my lab. Maren Gregerson is one of the new ADRC fellows. So finally, Trevor Dury is a clinical research coordinator, and Rachel Bunger is also a new research coordinator. So welcome to the Memory and Aging Project and greater ADRC family. Okay, so who are the people that the Memory and Aging Project sees as of right now? So active participants, there's 826 people. You can see they range from 40 to 100 years old. About a little more than half are women, 17% are African American, which is slightly greater than the overall percentage of African Americans in the St. Louis metropolitan region. So it's very similar to what it is, which is much better than it ever used to be before. The average years of education is quite high. And participants come from not just Missouri and Illinois, but from 21 total states. So we've actually have one participant now who's been doing this for 37 years. So you can see how devoted everybody is to participating. And that is really reflected in these biomarker completion rates over the last period of time, where you can see that, for example, almost all of these different tests, whether it's amyloid imaging, tau imaging, MRI, lumbar puncture, about 80% of the participants have had all of these different modalities done on them, which is probably, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's probably greater than any other comparable center that I can think of for having all of these tests on this high of a percentage of people. So just last month on June 15th, one of the things continued, which has been a tradition for many years, which is the Memory and Aging Project participants meeting. There were 370 MAP participants who attended, in addition to 48 night ADRC related faculty and staff, so over 400 people. Dr. Morris gave an overview of the night ADRC. Madeline Paczynski, one of our physician's assistants, talked about disease-modifying therapies for Alzheimer's disease. Suzanne Schindler talked about blood biomarkers. Cyrus Raji talked about obesity and elevated AD risk. And Arya Asfa talked about caregiving challenges. So this next year's event, I think, is scheduled to be at this point on June 7th. So hopefully everybody can try to attend that next year. The Night ADRC has many, many partners in our region. This just lists some of the key partners. So the Greater Missouri chapter of the Alzheimer's Association with Ed Clay and Sarah Lovegreen and many other people who work in our local Alzheimer's Association. Our African American Advisory Board, which I'll talk more about in a moment. We have a great ethics committee, the Links Incorporated St. Louis chapter, the Harvey Friedman Center for Aging, the Hope Center for Neurological Disorders. Barnes Jewish Hospital Foundation has contributed a lot of funds to the Night ADRC over the years. Birgit Spears is the person to call out there. And then from Washington University, outside of all of our affiliations, we have strong support from the Chancellor, Andrew Martin, Dean David Perlmutter of the medical school, the neurology department chair, Jin-Moo Lee, but also many other department chairs actually are contributing to the Night ADRC, as well as leaders from the McDonald Centers for Systems Neuroscience and Cellular and Molecular Biology. We have great support from advancement in media relations. So Pamela Henson, head of advancement, Will Arvin, the head of medical school advancement, Amy Smith, Christy Chan, and Jessica Church. And we have lots and lots of donors and friends over the years. Obviously the Knight family, Roger and Paul Riney, Daniel Brennan, David and Betty Farrell, Ruben and Barbara Morris, the Poletsky family, and the Blumenfeld family. And that's just some of the key people. There's many others as well. So since 2000, Dr. Morris, working with a number of other people, established what is now just an amazing, outstanding African American Advisory Board. And you can see this provides counsel on cultural sensitivity and outreach strategies and encourages research participation of African Americans. It represents our research community mission to the community, and it involves various area leaders in education, diversity, clergy, community advocacy, healthcare, and media communications. And you can see that the chair is Pastor Douglas Petty, the current chair. Vice chair is Reverend C. Jessel Strong. And then you can see the list of many other members of this group. And I think it's meeting every other month, if I'm not mistaken. And it's really been a great partnership. And I think it's allowing us to really do the best we can to try to improve on having both African Americans and others of diversity be much more involved in the research that we're doing. So here are some of our new ADRC clinicians. I mentioned them before, but Jonathan Williams just started seeing research participants. He's already an assistant professor in the epilepsy group. And then Maren Gregerson is our new fellow. She was a neurology resident that just started her ADRC fellowship in July. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about disparities in ADRD. So disparities likely reflect both biological and non-biological factors such as comorbid disorders and social determinants of health. And the clinical assessment of this now includes what's called the social and structural determinants influencing aging and dementia. The abbreviation for that's SSDIAD. And there's now a battery for this that is administered longitudinally to our research participants. In support of further work on ADRD disparities research, we did receive a grant from Cure Alzheimer's Fund to share African American and matched non-Hispanic white sample CSF and plasma. in conjunction with Emory University, with Alan Levy and James Law. And this has been going on now the last 5 years. There was an NIH-funded workshop called African American Participation in AD Research, Effective Strategies. This was an R13 grant. Dr. Morris, Dr. Mulder, many others were involved with, and there was at least at this workshop, which was held in Epnic in 2018, there were at least 2 representatives from each ADRC, plus the NIN local and national Alzheimer's Association staff. And this was an incredibly successful first workshop. And then in 2021, Joy Ballsbury wrote a successful R24 proposal to establish the co-equal registry, which is now, with our ADRC renewal, will be moving into the new ADRC, hopefully as it's renewed in the next year. So one of the things that was established now more than 18 years ago is the Norman Arce Lectureship. My understanding is this is the first endowed lectureship at Washington University that supports research studies related to African Americans and participation in research and involvement in research. And I think is still the only endowed lectureship at our university with this purpose. And so Norman Arce this was named after. He unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but he was an incredible advocate for health disparities related causes. So this last lectureship was given by Angela Hill, who's a professor at the University of South Florida. And she talked about strategies to avoid excluding marginalized group in a new area of treating Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. This just shows a picture of many of the people who were present at the lecture. And what was really exciting is just a little more than 6 months ago, we had a second night ADRC conference on enhancing participation by minoritized groups in ADRD. And this was also funded by an NIH grant, which Dr. Morris, Mulder, and others were very involved with obtaining. Yeah. And this was, again, funded in part by the NIA and the Alzheimer's Association. And again, all 37 ADRCs were represented. You can see the diversity of people that attended the conference. So what were some of the key takeaways from this meeting? There was increasing representation is essential to really ensuring rigor and integrity of scientific findings. Give first, ask second. So empowering underrepresented communities and building trust is really essential to develop a strong relationship and should be established before asking individuals to take part in research. Another point was community engaged research takes time and resources, and that certainly has been what we've observed here. You need to meet people where they are, go out to communities, and do not expect people to come to you. And then finally, having diverse research teams that reflect local communities is also a critical element. So this next few months, we'll have the 2024 Norman Arce Lecture. It's going to be on October 22nd, the 19th annual one. The lecturer is going to be Robert Turner, who's an assistant professor at George Washington University, and he's actually a former professional football player. So it'll be really interesting to hear what he talks about. So one of the things that, as I talked about earlier, that has been created here, which has been so effective in learning much more about AD/ADRD research, are incredibly devoted participants who do so many things and not only come in to get their clinical assessments, but also get multiple biomarker assessments. And while we've learned an incredible amount from these individuals, if you look at their, they're not necessarily reflective of the general population. So most of them have a college education. They are, although the representation of African Americans is now pretty similar to our region, most of the people in Ghana are incredibly educated. They're not they have income that is probably above average. So in order to try to do research that is more representative of people that are broadly in the community, one of the things Dr. Morris and others have recently tried to do is establish a new cohort of research individuals, and this has been called the COMPASS cohort. So the goal or the proposal of this is to enroll community dwelling persons age greater than or equal to 40 that are both cognitively normal and cognitively impaired, who are not expected to undergo all of the imaging or CSF biomarker studies at baseline or longitudinally. And so that's where this Community Partners Brain Health Study, or COMPASS cohort, came about. So the idea would be at entry and then annually thereafter, full clinical and cognitive assessments would be done, non-fasted blood draws, but not all the other biomarkers. And the goals of this are to better represent the St. Louis region's racial, socioeconomic, education, and comorbidity characteristics. Also get a greater percentage of people, of cognitively impaired people, and also that it would be less burden, improve retention, and serve as a source of referrals to affiliated studies. So where is this now? This was submitted as a potential funding source to, and recently, I think it just received a score, probably will need to be resubmitted, but 50 people were enrolled in the pilot group. Although it was more racially diverse, socioeconomic status and education were similar to our existing biomarker cohort. 23 people enrolled so far in 2024, 10 or more scheduled. So I think you'll be hearing more from Dr. Morris and others about this as this cohort gets further developed. So as many of you know, this really has been an unprecedented time in AD/ADRD research the last few years. For the first time, we have disease-modifying therapies that have actually been approved and we're using in patients. As you know, there was accelerated approval for an anti-amyloid antibody aducanumab, but more relevant to what we're doing now is that there was fully FDA approval for lecanemab a little more than about a year ago. And then also now donanemab. And there's anti-tau therapies being developed, combination therapies, prevention trials, many, many cool things that are going on in people, from which many of the studies here have been assisting with. So, of course, the rage of the day are blood-based biomarkers. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And so how are some of the many ways that our studies have been involved in ushering in this new era? So back in 2006, investigators here reported the first in vivo demonstration of preclinical AD by amyloid PET imaging. Our group were the first to show that preclinical Alzheimer's disease, as determined by CSF assays or amyloid PET, predicted cognitive decline. The first, basically first ever prevention trial for any form of Alzheimer's disease launched here in 2012 with the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer's Network Trials Group. This was the first ever trial with and then the first ever trial with combination therapies started in 2022. And then another thing that in terms of the blood-based biomarkers, one of the companies that Dr. Bateman and I was involved with from all the way from 2007, C2N Diagnostics has developed the first clinically available blood test for amyloidosis called Procivity AD, but this particular test has been further developed and it's now called Procivity AD2, and at least from laboratory-based studies as well as studies from C2N Diagnostics, it looks right now that the current combination of using p-tau 217 ratio to non-phosphorylated tau p217 with A-beta 4240 is the most accurate blood test currently for detecting brain amyloid that is actually clinically available. I think for many of these tests, though, that are either being developed, what will be super important is to actually get them covered by insurance so they can be used by many people around the world. Okay, so the Knight ADRC Clinical Trials Unit, led by Dr. Snyder, has been involved in many clinical trials the last several years, including the trials involving the anti-amyloid antibodies. But right now, I know, Joy, there's a new study that just started called START. This is a phase 2 study of CT1812. So this is an antagonist of the sigma-2 receptor. And it's a drug that theoretically may alter A beta oligomer toxicity. And this, just so people know, if you want to refer potential patients to this trial, you can see what some of the criteria are. So basically very mild AD MCI level impairment, 50 to 80 years old, and then people are randomized to 1:1:1 placebo plus 2 doses. This is a trial that's co-sponsored by the NIH-funded Alzheimer's Clinical Trial Consortium and Cognition Therapeutics. So have you guys enrolled your first participant? Yes, okay. Good. All right, so I'm going to just take the next few minutes just to update on some of the, we don't have time to go through all the incredible research that's accomplished by many of the ADRD investigators that are linked to the ADRC in some way or another. But I'll just highlight some that have been published in the last 12 months, just to give you a flavor of the variety of exciting things that are coming out. And again, this is, if I didn't include something that somebody here has done, I'm sorry, I could only include so many things. Okay, so I'll start with something I probably know a little bit more about, which is this a manuscript that we just published a few months ago that came out of my lab, but Yin Chen is the first author. And for anybody interested, Yin is defending his PhD thesis at 2 o'clock today. Anybody who would like to attend in the Fort Neuroscience Research Building. But one of the things that he and many colleagues showed is that back in 2019, there was a really interesting paper showing an individual who had autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease mutation in presenilin 1 that's in the Colombian kindred. And the woman that was reported on, unlike her relatives that become cognitively impaired at around age 44 or 45, she did not become impaired until after the age of 70. And it was found that she had a lot of amyloid in her brain, but very little tau pathology. And in addition, her ApoE gene had an interesting variant called the Christchurch variant. And what was known, so what wasn't clear from that study, other than she developed clinical disease very, very late relative to her peers, so she was protected against cognitive impairment. Whether the ApoE variant was actually the reason that she was protected or not. Because there's many reasons a single person could have been protected, environmental, who knows, right? So what Yin did in this paper is we made a new animal model that has the ApoE3 Christchurch variant, or just ApoE3. And we used a model of amyloid-induced tauopathy and found that, in fact, the Christchurch variant does markedly prevent against amyloid-induced tauopathy. And interestingly, it looks like, at least in this work, one of the main mechanisms that is involved is that this variant affects the ability of microglia to become more activated as well as degrade tau. And you'll hear more about this in the coming years, I'm sure. So I think it suggests something really, a potential new way to think about targeting ApoE as a therapeutic approach. So in work that was published from Brendan Lucy in conjunction with many investigators linked with the Bateman group, Brendan had been following up on work that drugs called orexin receptor antagonists may protect against certain aspects of AD-related changes in the brain that mostly was from animal studies. But what Brendan found is using lumbar catheter studies is that one of the clinically available orexin receptor antagonists that's available for patients who have sleep problems called suvorexant, that if you give it to patients acutely, that it lowers different forms of phosphorylated tau in the CSF. And I think this is something that will probably be followed up much more on in regard to the potential effects of drugs like this, not just acutely, but chronically on some of the other pathologies that occur in AD. So Nico Bartholomé, in conjunction with Oscar Hansen in Sweden and Randy Bateman and many, many others who are both in the room and affiliated with the ADRC, reported that if you utilize a highly accurate p-tau 217 to total 217 blood test, that the values that you obtain from that blood test are as accurate as currently FDA-approved tests like CSF 42 to 40 or CSF p-tau 181 to A-beta 42 ratio in determining whether somebody has amyloid. And I think this is something that is incredibly important and certainly suggests that over the next very short periods of time, 1, 2, 3 years, that instead of at least for determining whether somebody's amyloid positive, we'll hopefully be moving to using blood tests and not having to do lumbar punctures, at least for that purpose. Another really amazing finding came from Kantahori, also with the Bateman group, showing that one of the things that's known that many here have worked on, including Suzanne Schindler and Nico Bartholomé and Randy and many other people, is that when you start getting elevations of certain forms of phospho-tau in CSF or blood, like phospho-tau 217, it's actually increasing not because you're getting tau pathology, it increases because you get amyloid deposition. But so we didn't really have any fluid marker that indicated whether aggregated tau was building up in your brain. And what Kanta and others figured out is that there's a form of tau called MTBR243 that does increase as tau pathology accumulates in the brain. And it's specific for the accumulation of tau pathology, not amyloid pathology. And that's shown in some of these images from both the BioFinder cohort as well as our NIGHT ADRC cohort, that this marker is a reasonably good correlate of tau PET results. And I think this is super exciting, and I'm sure that this is likely to be translated soon into blood-based testing of the same marker. So that's a really exciting advance. Bo Ansis and colleagues in the study led by Julie Wish showed in a very nice paper studying adults with Down syndrome that if you look at and you compare individuals with Down syndrome to individuals with dominantly inherited Alzheimer's disease mutations, that as they accumulate amyloid in the brain on the x-axis, the amount of tau pathology that's present is higher in Down syndrome than it is in autosomal dominant AD, suggesting the possibility that perhaps for some reason amyloid is accelerating tau pathology faster in this population. So it'll be interesting to follow up on this and what its implications are in this population of people who really need additional therapies, just like everybody else that develops Alzheimer's disease. So this finding I'm showing here is not directly from Washington University, but it has direct connections. So we don't currently have any way to get rid of tau pathology in any tauopathy, including AD. But one of the ways that might be able to accomplish this is to lower the level of soluble tau production. And one of the ways this has been done in animal systems is to use antisense oligonucleotides to lower tau levels. And in studies done by Tim Miller's group a few years ago, they showed if you give tau ASOs to one of the tauopathy models, a mouse model called PS19 mice, that you could lower tau pathology and lower neurodegeneration. So Tim did this work with Ionis Pharmaceuticals, and now Ionis, together with Biogen, went into human studies. And in this large phase 1b study, what they showed is that people that got higher doses of this ASO intrathecally in humans, that after 1 year, their tau PET scans, the result was the tau PET was lower. And that never occurs spontaneously in people. So it really argues that they were hitting their target, that tau aggregates were being lowered, and now this company is moving into larger trials to actually see if it clinically will be beneficial. In terms of some of the ways of cognitive assessment, Jason Hasenstob's group has pioneered using smartphone technology. And in this publication that came out, they found that in people that have that are symptomatic due to early AD versus asymptomatic people, that one of the things that's different when they do use the repeated assessment on smartphones is the variability of the results that are obtained is higher in people that are beginning to be impaired. So suggesting a new way to be assessing people, whether it be for clinical trials or other purposes in the future. So one of the things that many of us here have been very interested in, who are studying biomarkers, whether it be fluid or imaging, is are there differences based on race, on what or other determinants into what you see in different people. And in this publication that came out in Annals of Neurology that was led by Kenji Zhang and many others here, and also at Emory. What was found is that if you look at non-Hispanic whites versus African Americans that are mostly cognitively normal, that there's a strong relationship between the fluid biomarkers of amyloid and, for example, amyloid imaging. However, when you look at African Americans that are about the same age range, they don't have that same relationship. And in a subsequent paper that came out from this group, it looks like this is probably due to the fact that the percentage of African Americans in the age range that develop amyloid deposition is lower. And this is now being found in a number of other studies. So it'll be really interesting to try to sort out what's going on there and what the reasons for that are to better understand this. Okay, some final things. So in terms of the clinical assessments that we do, there's been a transition recently to what's called the Uniform Dataset version 4, UDS version 4. The Uniform Dataset, UDS, was introduced to the ADRCs in 2005, and it was really to standardize longitudinal neurocognitive data collection across all the ADRCs. UDS version 3 is what we currently use. This new version will introduce a form focused on social determinants of health, as well as updated, more inclusive questions on gender, sexual orientation, multiracial identity, which will enable researchers to explore new and critical questions related to diversity, equity, and inclusion research. So the UDS-4 will hopefully advance the ADRD field with a new form focused on ADRD disease-modifying drugs, as well as new concepts throughout the UDS, including subjective cognitive decline, mild behavioral impairment, and a verbal learning test to assess new cognitive domains. In terms of promotions of affiliated faculty, Jason Hasenstob is just promoted to professor. So congratulations, Jason. And we wanted to recognize some of our many outstanding early stage investigators. So just recently, Audrey Kellerman was the 2024 awardee of the Richard and Mildred Pilecki Education Award, which is intended to enhance ongoing education and career development. So congratulations to Audrey. And then Jessica Mazursky received the Laura S. and John A. Blumenfeld Award, which is intended to recognize a highly promising early stage investigator and foster the next generation of ADRD investigators. So congratulations to them. We have many outstanding REC scholars who are listed here. Nicole Mackay, Peter Millar, Selena Washington, Gensheng Chen, Ava Klinman, Tom Lin, and Emily Wilross. So it's great you're all involved in this program, and hopefully you'll be attending many of the ADRC affiliated events during the year. Some quick facts about the Knight ADRC renewal. We just submitted the renewal June 6th for years 41 to 45. And the request was for over $20 million of funding and was 937 pages long. And over the past 5 years, you can see there have been 236 requests for participants, data, and biospecimens that were sent to investigators around the world. And these requests led to new grants separate than the ADRC to investigators that total almost $130 million. So, and also 504 papers were affiliated with NIDE ADRC resources. So this is just, you can see why the NIDE ADRC is so important for many reasons. One of the things that started a few years ago, but now has been expanded, is our participants now get compensated, not just for their biomarker tests that they get, but also for clinical and cognitive assessments. So that's hopefully helpful for encouraging people to, even though it's still not, they're not being paid what they probably should get if they did something else, but at least it encourages them to participate. And then the final thing I wanted to point out, for many of you are aware of this, but the new era of treating patients with disease-modifying drugs began at our site in the Memory Diagnostics Center in August of last year. Many people were responsible for making this work, including all of the incredible staff led by Dawn Ellington, Joy Snyder. Many of the physician partners are so, and BJC and BJH have been very, very involved in this. So those who are eligible for lecanemab treatment, and I'm sure this will be true for donanemab in the near future, has been only people with very mild symptomatic Alzheimer's disease are eligible to be treated. They must have evidence of amyloid plaques, either by PET scan, CSF, or blood in some cases. They must have no contraindication to a brain MRI and no MRI evidence of bleeding or, well, no significant evidence of bleeding or edema. They must be willing to undergo frequent drug infusions every 2 weeks for lecanemab and once a month for donanemab, although this probably will be moving within the near future to subcutaneous administration pretty soon. The degree of benefit from the clinical trial results is clear, but they're relatively small. So there's a mild slowing of the rate of dementia progression, at least over the 1.5 years that the trials were done. It may have a bigger effect longer, we don't know yet. So what's really amazing is through all the efforts of many talented people in our department system, and is that I think now, from looking at the website in the last day or so, we've have almost about 200 people we've already treated have at least received an infusion of lecanemab, which is more than any other academic medical center in the United States. That's a major accomplishment, and I think bodes well for us being able to implement new therapies as they come along. Okay, so last slide. So overall status of the NIDE ADRC. I think the NIDE ADRC is thriving. We have incredible clinician scientist staff, and administrators that really work together very effectively to make this all work. And I personally just want to thank everyone involved in the NIDE ADRC, because it really is a team effort and we have a great team. So thanks to all of you, and happy to take any questions if you have any.